Hi there. Today we're going to talk about how to evaluate web sources. Not all websites are equal and reliable when it comes to academic research, so I'm going to give you some tips to help you determine whether a website is actually worth your time and effort. One of the first places students go when they want to do research for an academic paper is a search engine like Google. That's not necessarily wrong, but you have to be careful about the sources you choose to use for your paper. There's a lot of information available on the internet, but not all of it is credible or useful, especially for scholarly research. Today we're going to look at some of the important elements you need to help you determine whether a website is appropriate for your paper. Research online often starts with a general search on a keyword or two, so we're going to look up information on child abuse for this example. Notice how many hits we get with that broad search. Over 250 million. We should probably add a few more keywords to see if we can narrow it down further, but we're just trying to get some general information, so we'll start by looking at some of the sites brought up here. Notice that the first few sites are listed as ads. These sites have paid to be promoted, so I would probably skip them. But let's start with the first basic point of evaluation: domain. What do those extensions on the URL actually indicate? The most common domain is the .com. That simply means a commercial site that anyone can register and promote whatever they want to pitch or sell. Even if it's a medical website, they might be selling you something, or they might be supported by advertisers who may or may not be connected to the owners. .biz is for smaller companies, and .info is just another common domain that anyone can register. .edus used to be limited to four-year degree-granting colleges and universities. Now they include regionally accredited institutions of higher learning like community colleges. Many primary and secondary schools also have web domains, and in the United States are usually represented by the abbreviation of their state name plus .k12.us. And notice sometimes you'll see a .uk or a .ca in that domain address. That simply means that that is a country outside of our area. So .uk would be the United Kingdom, .ca would be Canada. But one word of caution about .edus: just because they're associated with a college or a school of some kind, that does not mean that you'll find scholarly information there. For example, it could be a professor's site that he's put up for his class, but it could also be a student's project for a class. So you want to make sure you know who the author of that is. Government websites are strictly regulated. Only the government can own these domains, so statistics and information found here are pretty trustworthy. Another common domain is the .org. This domain is usually owned by nonprofit organizations like the Public Broadcasting System or the American Red Cross. You can often find decent information on a nonprofit site, but that doesn't mean that it's of scholarly value. Anyone can buy a .org address, so there's no guarantee that the information is unbiased or even accurate. Sometimes even for-profit companies purchase these domains. So how do we know if a website is a good resource? Well, there's more to that website than its URL. Think about what we usually consider for our reference information, as well as the source's usefulness. Let's start with some ground rules. There are a few things you want to be sure your site has before you even consider using it as a source in your paper. First of all, make sure you have a named and credible author. If you're not sure about the author's credentials, Google them. If you're using a government website, you might not find an author. In that case, the agency would be considered the author, like the U.S. Census Bureau. You also want to make sure there's a clear date of publication, or at least a date that the site was last updated. If your source is an online newspaper, it might not necessarily be scholarly per se, but if it's reputable, then it will be considered a professional and journalistic source. If that meets your purpose, then it's probably an acceptable source. Otherwise, look for something that indicates a scholarly connection. You also want to look at the language on that website. Make sure that it's at the appropriate level and that it's free of a lot of errors. If you get a website that has a lot of misspellings or a lot of typos, that's not a good indication as to its scholarly or even professional value. You also want to make sure the language is elevated. You don't want a lot of slang or a lot of very, very simple language. It should be something a little more professional than that. Now, this last one can be a little trickier. Some publications, both online and in print, have well-defined biases. We may know that a particular newspaper is liberal or one that's conservative, but sometimes it's a little more subtle than that. So, if you're not sure, go back to the purpose of the site and the credentials of the authors for some hints about potential bias. As for reliability, whenever possible, triangulate the results. That means check to see if you can find similar information in 3 different sources. But beware, sources like Wikipedia often cut and paste information. So if you see the exact same wording in 3 different places, that's not true reliability. That's just 3 different people pasting the exact same information. These are the basic elements that you might have or that you must have in order to consider a website as a potential source. Let's take a look at an example. One of the first sites listed in our search results is a website called safehorizon.org. There's a lot going on this first page here. You've got a picture of 2 smiling children kind of grinning at you, getting your attention, and you have lots of links to different articles on the left-hand sidebar. But what else do you notice about this page? Let's take a closer look. Notice how many times you're given the hint to donate money to this cause. And there's one right up there toward the top. And there's a second one right there in the menu bar. And in case you get down to the bottom without realizing it, there's another donate button. On first glance, you should consider what the purpose of the site is. The domain extension can only tell you so much. The purpose of this site seems admirable enough. It's to help victims of abuse. But there's really no immediate evidence that we'll find scholarly information on this site. So it may be that we just need to dig a little deeper. However, too many students want to just use this basic page as their source. But what's missing? If you can't find key reference information, it'll be difficult to cite, and it probably won't be a very solid source. So let's go back to our basic checklist for source information. Keep in mind the kind of information you would need for your reference page entry. First, there's no clear author on the main facts page. But if you look a little further, go down to the bottom, there's a list of resources. So while you can't actually cite an author for this page, you could certainly go directly to the resources listed here and use those as potential sources. And notice how several of them are government websites. They'll probably have some good statistics for you. As for publication date, this site offers a copyright date, but that does not necessarily mean that the information has been updated recently. So that one is questionable at best. We know that the purpose of this site is to raise money and awareness. And while its mission is laudable, I would not count it as a scholarly website. Appropriate language can refer to age or academically appropriate language, but it can also refer to those clear and correct grammar, spelling, and usage issues. In this case, we have a couple of mistakes, but the site generally seems to be written at an adult and professional level. However, careless mistakes don't help credibility much. So I wouldn't discard this site strictly on these few errors alone, but I wouldn't be too quick to use it either. This site seems to have reasonable information, but again, we don't have any reason to believe it's particularly unbiased. So this site seems to offer some good information resources for victims of abuse. However, as far as using this site in terms of scholarly research sources, it's not really fit for an academic paper, and I would say move on to a better choice. Wait, does that mean you can't use this site at all? Well, while you can't actually sort this particular site for your paper, there are some links to other sources on the site that might be scholarly enough for your purposes. Let's take another look at it. This website might not be credible on its own, but on the home page you'll find a news log. One of these items might be useful to you. And if you click on one of these resources, you end up on another Safe Horizon web page that has embedded the article there. But don't stop there. If you scroll down the page, you'll see a Read the Original Article Here link. If you click on that link, it will take you to the original New York Times web article. Now you have a reasonable source. It's a major newspaper that appears both in print and online and could be considered credible enough for certain kinds of research. You have the authors and the date of publication. And if your site doesn't give you a link to the original, go to the main web page for the source, in that case the New York Times, and search for the article. So let's check this article against our list. We have an author, we have a publication date. The purpose is not so much scholarly as professional journalism, so we'll count that as solid as long as it's not an editorial. The language is appropriate and formal or professional. And bias could be a little bit tricky when it comes to newspapers, but a well-respected paper like the New York Times, while it leans a little bit more to the liberal side, it's generally acceptable information. It's not empirical research, though. This brings up a point about newspapers and magazines. Be aware of what the general perception is about non-academic periodicals. If they are well-known propaganda tools, just be aware and decide how you plan to use it. There are several cheat sites out there, and though you might be searching for your topic in earnest, sometimes an essay from one of these sites comes up in your research. So make sure you know where the information is coming from before you use it in the paper. So avoid sites like about.com, 123helpme.com, infoplease.com, even answers.yahoo.com is not really a good place to go. As for Wikipedia, it's not a scholarly source, so you won't use it as such. But you might scroll to the bottom of a Wikipedia page and look at the sources the article cites. A lot of times you'll find hot links that you can click on and go straight to the source. That could be very useful. For an academic paper, though, nothing beats a good database of scholarly articles. The University System of Georgia gathers databases together in their Galileo service, where you can find articles from hundreds of academic and professional journals, as well as newspapers and government documents. Subscriptions are available to all public and private K-12 and higher level education institutions and libraries around the state. Other states have similar services. While a Google search can give us some ideas and some resources, you have to do a lot more work to verify the value of a web source. A database source like Galileo can do a lot of that work for you. For more information on how to navigate this resource, check out our next video on using Galileo.